Snow was falling gently over Manhattan, the kind that makes the city look like a dream wrapped in gold lights. Grace Miller stood beneath the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree, one hand on her belly, the other gripping her phone. She was 7 months pregnant and smiling through the cold, waiting for her husband Ethan. They had promised to meet here, exchange gifts, and watch the lights before heading home to their apartment near Fifth Avenue. Her phone buzzed. Ethan Cole message received. She smiled until she opened it. "Grace, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Please don't come looking for me." For a second, everything went silent, even the music, even the laughter around her. Grace blinked at the screen, thinking it must be a mistake. Then, a notification popped up on social media, a live video. The caption read, "Congratulations Ethan and Ava, the Christmas wedding of the year." Her trembling thumb tapped the video. There he was, Ethan wearing his black tuxedo, standing beside Ava Brooks, a blonde model with a perfect smile, in a penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. They were toasting champagne, friends cheering behind them. Ava leaned in and kissed him. Grace's knees weakened. The crowd around her blurred. The golden lights that once felt magical now looked cruel and sharp. She tried calling him once, twice, 3 times, no answer. Instead, her hotel app sent a notification. "Your room at the Plaza Hotel has been canceled. Guest requested early checkout." She stood frozen as flakes melted on her eyelashes. Then came the sting of realization Ethan had canceled the room. He'd erased her from his life before midnight. Dragging her small suitcase, Grace found a yellow cab. The driver asked softly, "Rough night?" She only nodded, staring at her reflection in the fogged window, a woman who looked older, fragile, betrayed. On her lap lay a small wrapped box, Ethan's Christmas gift, a silver pen engraved "Forever Yours." When she reached their apartment building, she tried her key. It didn't fit. The lock had been changed. Her heart raced as she pounded on the door, whispering, "Ethan, please." The doorman approached awkwardly. "Mrs. Cole, I'm sorry. Mr. Cole told us you wouldn't be returning." She felt the baby kick a tiny reminder of life inside her, of someone who still needed her. Her throat burned. Inside her coat pocket, she found a folded ultrasound photo. A little heartbeat flickered in grayscale. Grace sank to the cold marble floor, holding the photo close. From the penthouse above, laughter echoed faintly. She could almost hear Ethan's voice, charming and confident, saying the same lies he'd once told her. "You're the only one I'll ever love." Her phone buzzed again. One final message from him. "I hope you understand, Grace. Ava and I, we fit. You'll be fine. Merry Christmas." Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "You left your family for a headline." She wandered back outside. Snow covered her suitcase wheels, her breath turning white in the frigid air. She didn't know where to go, no parents, no family left. The only sound was the city's muffled heartbeat beneath the snow. At the corner, a young hotel clerk, who had seen her crying earlier, quietly offered a paper cup. "Ma'am, it's hot tea. Merry Christmas." Grace took it with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered. In that small gesture, something flickered inside her, not hope yet, but survival. As she sat alone on the curb, watching couples hurry past with gifts and laughter, one thought echoed in her mind. This can't be how my story ends. But little did Grace know that same night, one person was already looking for her, and he would change everything. The next morning, sunlight hit the frozen windows of Manhattan like broken glass. Grace woke up on a bench near Bryant Park, her coat dusted with snow. Her phone had died overnight, her body stiff from the cold. She hadn't slept, just stared at the Christmas lights flickering above, thinking maybe this was all a nightmare. But nightmares end when you wake up. This one didn't. Dragging her small suitcase, she made her way to their apartment building on East 59th. Her breath turned white in the cold air as she walked through the marble lobby, hoping maybe Ethan had changed his mind. The concierge avoided her eyes. "Mrs. Cole," he said carefully. "Mr. Cole left instructions that you may collect personal belongings only. 10 minutes. Her heart dropped. 10 minutes. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. After that, the unit will be secured." The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, she stepped into what used to be home, but it already smelled different. The Christmas tree they decorated last week was gone. The walls looked bare. Boxes labeled Ava B. stood near the entrance. Grace felt her stomach twist. She grabbed what she could: maternity clothes, her worn-out iPhone charger, a baby blanket she'd been knitting, and a single wedding photo. Her hands shook as she looked around one last time. The framed wedding picture on the wall was gone. Only a faint outline remained where it once hung. The sound of heels echoed in the hallway. Grace turned and froze. Ava Brooks stood there, wearing a long beige coat, sunglasses perched on her head, a Cartier bracelet glittering under the morning light. "Oh," Ava said with a soft, fake smile. "Didn't know you'd still be here." Grace clenched her jaw. "It's still my home." "Was," Ava corrected, brushing invisible dust off her coat. "Don't worry. Ethan's taking care of everything." Before Grace could answer, the elevator dinged again. Ethan stepped out, holding a leather briefcase and looking uncomfortable. "Grace," he started, his voice low, "I didn't mean for you to see her yet." "You mean after you changed the locks? After you left me outside last night?" she snapped. He sighed, glancing at Ava. "Don't make a scene, please." The humiliation burned through her like acid. The man who once promised forever was now treating her like a stranger in her own hallway. She took a shaky breath, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. "You're not even ashamed, are you?" Ethan avoided her gaze. "You'll be fine, Grace. I've arranged for a small settlement. You can start fresh." Her voice trembled. "I don't need your money. I need a husband who doesn't abandon his pregnant wife on Christmas Eve." Silence. Even Ava looked uneasy for a moment before whispering, "Let's go, Ethan. We have the interview at Dior in an hour." Ethan turned away. "You should leave before security has to escort you." Grace wanted to scream, to throw the picture frame at him, but instead, she picked up her suitcase and walked out. The elevator doors closed behind her, sealing off everything she'd built for 3 years. In the lobby, the doorman looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "Ma'am," he said gently. "There's a car waiting outside." A black Mercedes S-Class idled by the curb. Grace saw Ethan and Ava climb inside, laughing about something as the car pulled away. Her vision blurred. The world spun. She steadied herself against the wall, whispering to her unborn child, "We'll be okay. I promise." With nowhere to go, she sat on a nearby bench, trying to breathe. Then she remembered a name: Daniel Hayes. Daniel had been her college friend, now a corporate lawyer on Park Avenue. He'd always been kind, the kind of man who listened. She hesitated, opened her cracked iPhone, and typed through tears, "Daniel, it's Grace. I need help. Please." Her message sent. The screen went black, battery dead. She closed her eyes, whispering into the cold air, "Please. God, let him see it." And miles away, in a quiet office overlooking Park Avenue, Daniel's phone buzzed and everything began to change. Daniel Hayes was finishing paperwork in his office on Park Avenue when his phone buzzed. The message appeared on his screen, half frozen from a weak signal. He hadn't heard from Grace Miller in years, not since graduation. He called back instantly, but it went straight to voicemail. Something in his gut told him this wasn't a casual message. He grabbed his coat, left the Mont Blanc pen still rolling on the desk, and hurried down to the street. Snow had started again, light and silent. He pulled out his phone and checked her last known address. By the time Daniel reached East 59th, the street was nearly empty. He spotted her sitting on a bench, hugging her small suitcase, eyes red and distant. She looked fragile, and yet there was something unbroken in her gaze. He walked up quietly. "Grace?" She looked up slowly, as if afraid to believe her eyes. "Daniel?" Without another word, he took off his scarf and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're freezing. Come on, let's get you inside." He helped her into his car, an old SUV he'd never replaced, despite his success. Inside, the heater blasted warm air, fogging the windows. Grace stared at her reflection in the glass, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He married her last night," she whispered. On Christmas Eve. He changed the locks, Daniel. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, jaw tight. That bastard. She laughed weakly, wiping her face. You always said he was too polished to be real. He gave a half smile. Guess I was right. He drove her to his apartment in the Upper West Side, cozy, lined with books, smelling faintly of coffee and cedarwood. A small Christmas tree still blinked in the corner. It's not much, he said softly, but it's warm. Grace sank into the couch, exhaustion catching up to her. Daniel handed her a mug of hot cocoa, the same way he used to when they studied late nights in college. She held it close, letting the steam hit her face. Does anyone else know? He asked. She shook her head. No family left. My grandma passed last year. Daniel nodded slowly. Then it's just us. But we'll fix this. He opened his MacBook Pro, typing quickly. Tell me everything, the marriage certificate, property papers, anything with your name on it. Grace reached into her purse, pulling out a few crumpled documents. Daniel scanned them. Okay, your name's still on the joint account. That's good. We can file an emergency petition for spousal rights and prenatal support. He can't legally abandon you like this. Grace blinked at him, hope flickering. You really think I have a chance? Daniel met her eyes. Grace, you're still his wife. And this time, you've got me. She looked down, clutching the ultrasound photo in her lap. He said I wasn't enough for his world, she murmured. Daniel's voice softened. Then we'll show him what your world really is. He paused, noticing a small wooden box sticking out from her suitcase. What's that? Grace hesitated. Something my grandma left me before she died. I never opened it. Daniel tilted his head. Maybe now's the time. Grace nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a faded letter and an old photograph, two women standing together at a restaurant overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge. Her grandmother was one of them. The other looked familiar somehow. Daniel frowned. Wait, isn't that Elaine Carter, the founder of Carter and Wells? Grace's breath caught. My grandma said she used to work for her, but... She trailed off, eyes scanning the letter. Her lips parted. Oh my God. Daniel leaned forward. What does it say? Grace's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, she wasn't just her boss, she was her best friend. And my father was Elaine Carter's son. Daniel stared, speechless for a moment. Grace, that means I might be her granddaughter, she finished, voice trembling. For the first time in days, something other than pain crossed her face, shock, disbelief, and the faintest spark of destiny. And somewhere across Manhattan, in a glass office high above the skyline, Elaine Carter was about to receive a call that would reopen a chapter she thought was buried forever. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the heater. Grace sat on the couch, clutching the old wooden box like it was a piece of her soul. Daniel sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her face pale and brighten in waves as she read the letter again and again. Grace, he said gently, read it out loud. I need to hear it. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the fragile paper, edges yellowed from time. Her grandmother's handwriting flowed in blue ink, neat but emotional. My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, it means I'm gone. There is something you were never told. Your father wasn't just anyone, he was the son of Elaine Carter, founder of Carter and Wells. I kept this from you to protect you from their world, but one day, when you are strong enough, you'll know where you truly belong. The letter ended with a photograph her grandmother laughing beside a young Elaine Carter at the River Cafe, the Brooklyn Bridge glowing in the background. On the back was a note. To my best friend, the sister I never had love. Elaine. Grace's lips quivered. I don't understand. If this is true, why didn't anyone tell me? Daniel leaned back, thinking fast. If Elaine Carter's son was your father, and she's still alive, you're technically her granddaughter. That means, I'm family, Grace whispered, part of the company my husband tried to use against me. Daniel's jaw tightened. And that makes his betrayal even worse. He stood and paced toward his desk, pulling up Carter and Wells' corporate website. Elaine Carter's portrait stared back at them, dignified, elegant, her silver hair pinned perfectly. She's still chairwoman, Daniel said. If we can prove the bloodline, you could inherit rights, or at least have a say in the company's trust. Grace frowned, still clutching the letter. You think she'd believe me? A stranger showing up with a box and a story? Not a stranger, Daniel replied. Her granddaughter. And I'll help you prove it. She glanced down at her hands, wedding ring still shining faintly in the dim light. Ethan always used to brag about wanting to work at Carter and Wells, she murmured. He said it was the future, the kind of power he deserved. Maybe that's why he married me. Daniel froze. You think he knew? Grace nodded slowly. Maybe not at first, but I once mentioned my grandmother's name, and he asked strange questions. About her job, about where she lived before Ohio. He even asked if she ever met anyone in New York. Daniel exhaled sharply. That's how Victor Lang fits into this. Victor? CFO of Carter and Wells. Ethan met him once, at a charity event. If Ethan realized you had even a distant link to Elaine Carter, he might have tried to use it. Grace stared at him, disbelief turning into quiet rage. So he didn't just betray me. He planned it. Daniel sat beside her, his voice steady but warm. Then we use what he built against him. First, we verify this letter. We'll need DNA proof, a direct test between you and Elaine. Grace blinked. How can we even reach her? He gave a small smile. You'd be surprised what a good lawyer can do. Pulling out his phone, Daniel called a private investigator he trusted, someone discreet. He handed over the details and the photo from the River Cafe. Find Elaine Carter. Tell her a woman named Grace Miller has something that belongs to her past. When he hung up, Grace looked both terrified and relieved. What if she wants nothing to do with me? Then at least you'll know the truth, Daniel said. But something tells me she'll want to see you. Grace nodded, wiping away tears. For the first time since Ethan left, her tears weren't just from heartbreak, they were from awakening. Later that night, as Daniel worked quietly at his desk, Grace stood by the window. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glowed under soft snow. Somewhere out there, Ethan was celebrating with his model bride, drunk on champagne and vanity. But Grace was no longer the broken woman he'd left behind. She touched her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "We're not alone anymore." And across the city, Elaine Carter looked down at an old photo on her desk, the same one Grace held, and whispered, could it really be her? By New Year's Eve, the city had moved on. The news cycle spun with glitter, fireworks, and celebrity weddings, and right in the middle of it, Grace saw the face she used to wake up beside. Her phone screen lit up with a headline from the Manhattan Chronicle. Ethan Cole marries supermodel Ava Brooks, the power couple of 2025. There it was, a full-page photo of Ethan in his tailored tuxedo and Ava in a backless Dior gown, posing outside a luxury event on Fifth Avenue. Behind them, the Cartier logo gleamed on the window like a crown. The caption read, Ethan, the ambitious marketing executive, finds his perfect match in the dazzling Ava Brooks. Grace stared at the photo, her hand shaking. Ava's diamond ring sparkled like an insult. Ethan's grin, confident, careless, burned into her memory. The same grin he'd had when he told Grace she was lucky to have him. Daniel walked into the living room, holding 2 coffees from Starbucks. Grace, I got you decaf, he said softly. But when he saw her face, he stopped. What happened? She turned the phone toward him. They're everywhere. Daniel took a breath, jaw tightening. Of course, they're playing it for publicity. Grace gave a bitter laugh. Publicity? He abandoned his pregnant wife on Christmas Eve. How is that romantic? Daniel set the coffees down, his expression shifting from sympathy to calculation. You know what this means, don't you? They're preparing something bigger. Ava's agent is probably arranging press deals, sponsorships, maybe even a collaboration with Carter and Wells. Her stomach dropped. That's the company my grandmother's letter mentioned. He nodded. Exactly. Ethan's trying to climb through her. Grace covered her face with her hands. I can't even fight him, Daniel. He took everything, the apartment, the savings. I have no power. Daniel leaned forward. You have more power than you think. Legally, you're still his wife. That means he can't remarry without committing fraud. Grace looked up, startled. "What?" Daniel smirked faintly. "He didn't file for divorce, right? And you didn't sign anything?" "No." "Then that wedding is just a performance. We can expose it." Grace shook her head, tears welling again. "Even if we could, I don't want more humiliation. I just want my life back." Daniel hesitated. "Then maybe it's time to stop running from the pain and start building something out of it." He opened his laptop, scrolling through public business records. Ethan's been in contact with Victor Lang, the CFO at Carter & Wells. Look at this emails between them about media campaigns and leverage strategies. "Leverage," she repeated. Daniel turned the screen toward her. "He's using Ava's fame to get a meeting with Victor. If they pull it off, Ethan could position himself as a PR consultant for Carter & Wells, the same company you're secretly tied to by blood." Grace felt the anger rise from deep inside. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore, it was strategic. Ethan had used her, discarded her, and now was stepping into the empire that should have been part of her legacy. Daniel's voice softened. "We'll prove it. But first, you need to stay calm and healthy for the baby. I'll handle the legal side." She nodded weakly, staring out the window. Snowflakes danced over the skyline, white against the steel towers of Manhattan. For the first time, the city didn't feel cruel. It felt like a challenge. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification, this time a cruel one. A gossip blogger had posted a photo of her leaving Ethan's building weeks ago, captioned, "The ex-wife who couldn't keep up." Grace shut her eyes. "They're turning me into a joke." Daniel reached over, placing a steady hand on hers. "Then we'll rewrite the story." He pulled up a blank document on his MacBook Pro, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. "We'll file a formal statement, quiet but powerful. No gossip, just facts. And trust me, Grace, when the truth comes out, the world will see who really deserves the headline." Outside, Manhattan glittered like a battlefield, and Grace was just starting to find her armor. It was past midnight when Grace's phone rang. The sound sliced through the quiet apartment like a blade. She'd been half asleep on Daniel's couch, the city lights blinking through the curtains, her hand resting on her growing belly. She frowned, reaching for the phone. The number was blocked. "Hello?" she said softly. There was a pause then, a man's low voice, smooth but threatening. "If you know what's good for you, Grace, you'll stop talking to lawyers. You'll stop digging. You'll disappear." Her heart froze. "Who is this?" "You don't need to know who I am," the voice continued. "Just know that your baby won't have a father if you don't stay quiet, and maybe not a mother either." The call ended. Grace sat there, shaking, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, even the muffled city noise felt like they were closing in on her. She clutched her belly, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. Mommy's here." Moments later, Daniel appeared in the doorway, wearing sweatpants and a white t-shirt, his hair messy from sleep. "Grace? What happened?" She handed him the phone, her voice breaking. "Someone just called. They knew about the case, about you." Daniel's expression hardened instantly. He played back the voicemail she'd accidentally recorded, the distorted male voice echoing through the room. His jaw tightened. "That's a threat." He grabbed his jacket. "We're reporting this right now." At the Midtown police station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Grace gave her statement. Her hands trembled as she described the voice, the words, the timing. Daniel stood beside her, his tone sharp and professional as he spoke to the officer. "This woman is 7 months pregnant, under public scrutiny, and involved in a potential corporate investigation. You'll treat this as serious harassment." The officer nodded, jotting notes. "We'll issue a trace and flag your number. Any more calls like that, we'll know." Grace thanked him quietly. She looked drained, pale from exhaustion. Daniel guided her outside into the cold night, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "You shouldn't stay alone anymore," he said. "You'll move into my guest room until we figure this out." She hesitated. "Daniel, I can't." "You can," he interrupted. "You and that baby are not facing this alone." Back at his apartment, he made her tea and handed her one of his law books to distract her mind. But she couldn't focus. Every creak of the building made her flinch. She finally whispered, "What if Ethan's behind this?" Daniel paused mid-sip. "It's possible." Or, Victor Lang, "Someone's trying to scare you before you talk to Elaine Carter." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "They already took everything from me. What more do they want?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "Control, and we're not going to give it to them." He connected his laptop to a secure database, starting a trace on the number. Lines of code reflected on his glasses as he murmured, "If they think fear will make you run, they don't know you like I do." Grace smiled weakly. "You always were the calm one." He chuckled. "You were the brave one." Outside, the city shimmered with the glow of streetlights reflecting off melting snow. Grace walked to the window, staring down at the quiet street. "Daniel," she said softly, "if something happens to me, promise me you'll protect my baby." His eyes darkened. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Grace. I promise." The next morning, Daniel arranged a security check on his apartment and scheduled an appointment for Grace with her doctor. The baby was healthy, heartbeat strong. The sound filled the exam room, steady and fierce. Grace smiled through tears as the doctor said, "She's doing perfectly." Outside the clinic, a woman sitting in the waiting area glanced up at Grace, an older lady with kind eyes. She reached over, touched Grace's hand gently, and said, "Whatever storm you're in, darling, it will pass. You're stronger than you think." Grace felt something warm fill her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Back in the car, Daniel's phone pinged. An email from a private investigator. Grace looked at Daniel, her pulse quickening. "She said yes?" He nodded. "She said yes." And as Manhattan woke under a new sunrise, Grace didn't know that this meeting would not only prove her bloodline, it would also expose the first crack in the empire that betrayed her. The next morning, Manhattan glowed under a pale winter Sunday. Snow glittered on the sidewalks as chauffeurs helped executives step out of black sedans. Grace stood in front of a glass tower on Park Avenue, staring up at the name etched in silver letters above the revolving doors, Carter and Wells. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought people might hear it. Inside her coat, her hand rested protectively on her belly. She was about to walk into the building that symbolized everything Ethan had ever wanted, and everything she never knew belonged to her. Daniel stood beside her, calm and focused in his charcoal suit. "You ready?" She nodded, though her voice trembled. "As I'll ever be." The receptionist greeted them with professional warmth, leading them through marble floors and glass walls that reflected the skyline. Grace noticed every detail: the Mont Blanc pens neatly lined on the conference table, the subtle scent of jasmine, the faint hum of money and power in the air. When the door opened, Elaine Carter entered. She was elegant, composed, wearing a cream suit and a vintage Rolex that caught the light with every movement. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, studied Grace carefully before she spoke. "You must be Grace Miller." Grace's breath hitched. "Yes, ma'am." Elaine gestured for them to sit. "Mr. Hayes, I appreciate your discretion. My assistant said this was urgent." Daniel placed the wooden box on the table. "Mrs. Carter, this belonged to Grace's grandmother, Evelyn Miller. There's a letter and a photograph of you together. We believe you'll recognize them." Elaine's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the photo. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her face softened. "Evelyn," she whispered. "I haven't heard that name in 40 years. Grace's eyes filled. "She was my grandmother." Elaine looked up sharply, the weight of realization dawning in her gaze. "Then your father was Michael Carter," Grace said quietly. She wrote it in her letter. Elaine leaned back, visibly shaken. "My son. I thought I lost him forever." Daniel cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Carter, I've already verified the date and handwriting. We can arrange a DNA test, confidentially. Grace isn't seeking publicity, just truth." Elaine looked at Grace again, softer now, searching for traces of the family she thought was gone. "You have his eyes," she whispered. "And her kindness." Grace smiled through tears. "Grandma used to say the same thing." Silence filled the room, heavy but warm. Finally, Elaine nodded. "We'll do the test. I'll have my physician handle it privately. She hesitated, then reached out, placing her hand gently over Grace's. No matter what the results say, you are welcome here, Grace. Grace's lips parted in shock. You mean? I mean, Elaine said firmly. If Evelyn trusted you enough to carry this secret, I will honor that. For the first time in months, Grace felt the ground beneath her steady. They finished the meeting with quiet professionalism, signing confidentiality forms. As they left, Elaine paused at the door. Grace, she said softly, the world can be cruel to women who tell the truth. But you tell it anyway. Don't let anyone silence you. Outside, the crisp air filled Grace's lungs like a second chance. She and Daniel walked toward the curb, the city swirling around them, yellow cabs, cold wind, sunlight glinting off glass. Daniel turned to her. That went better than I hoped. Grace exhaled, smiling faintly. I can't believe she remembered my grandmother. He nodded. It means she's already halfway convinced. As they waited for a cab, Grace glanced up at the towering building, thinking of Ethan and Victor Lang inside their web of lies. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She felt like a woman stepping into her rightful place. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stay out of Carter and Wells' business. Last warning. Grace's smile faded. Daniel saw her face change. Another threat. She nodded, handing him the phone. He read the message, his jaw tightening. They know you were here. Grace looked back at the skyscraper, gleaming, ruthless, beautiful. Then they know I'm not afraid anymore. And somewhere in a boardroom 20 floors above them, Victor Lang ended a phone call and muttered. So she finally met Elaine. Time to accelerate the plan. The city looked calm from above. But inside Carter and Wells, storms were forming behind glass doors. Victor Lang, the company's calculating CFO, stood in his corner office, staring at a spreadsheet glowing on his MacBook Pro. Lines of numbers hid a secret offshore accounts, unreported transfers, and a trail of stolen millions. When his assistant entered, Victor didn't look up. Any news on Elaine Carter's meeting yesterday? She met privately with a woman named Grace Miller, the assistant replied. No official memo. But rumor says Elaine called legal afterward. Victor's eyes narrowed. Grace Miller. That name again. The wife of Ethan Cole. Right? Yes, sir. Victor smirked. Ethan said she was weak. But if Elaine's suddenly interested in her, that could ruin everything. He closed his laptop with a soft click. Tell Ethan I need to see him tonight. No excuses. Across the city, Grace was finishing lunch with Daniel at a quiet cafe near Central Park. The sunlight danced on the snow outside, and for a brief moment, she felt normal, almost peaceful. Daniel's phone buzzed. He checked the message, frowning. The lab confirmed Elaine's request. DNA testing tomorrow morning. Private clinic. Grace's heart lifted slightly. So soon? He smiled. Elaine doesn't waste time. She wants answers. But beneath that smile, Daniel's eyes carried caution. Grace, once this test comes back, you'll be part of something much bigger. The company's power structure is fragile right now. If Victor finds out, he'll try to discredit you. Grace nodded. Let him try. I've lived through worse. That night, Ethan arrived at Victor's penthouse overlooking the Hudson. He looked uneasy, his new marriage already losing its shine. You said it was urgent. Victor poured whiskey into 2 glasses. It is. Your ex-wife is back. And not just back, she's sitting in meetings with Elaine Carter. Ethan froze. What? How? Apparently, she's family. Some long-lost granddaughter. If that's true, everything we've been working for falls apart. Elaine will hand her part of the company. Ethan slammed the glass down. No, that can't be real. Grace doesn't have the guts to play in that league. Victor smirked. Oh, she's learning, and she's got a lawyer who's smarter than he looks. He leaned closer. We'll handle it before she becomes a problem. I want you to invite her somewhere public, a charity gala, something glamorous. Make her feel safe. Then, we'll control the narrative. Ethan frowned. You mean? I mean, Victor interrupted. We'll let the press see her with you. We'll paint her as desperate, unstable, the fragile wife who can't move on. Ethan hesitated. That's low, even for you. Victor's grin was cold. You already left your pregnant wife for a model. Don't pretend you care about morality now. The next morning, Grace woke early in Daniel's apartment. She watched the city through the window, her mind spinning. The upcoming DNA test scared her not because of the result, but because of what it meant. At the clinic, Elaine was already there, calm and poised. The test was quick, a simple cheek swab. Yet when their eyes met, something deeper passed between them, something that no document could measure. Afterward, Elaine placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. No matter what happens, my door is open. Grace smiled softly. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Call me Elaine, she said, her voice warm. When Grace left the clinic, she felt lighter, unaware that Ethan was watching from across the street, hidden behind tinted glass. He lowered his phone after snapping a photo of her and sent it to Victor. She took the bait. I'll handle the rest. That night, Grace received an invitation in her inbox. The Ritz-Carlton Charity Gala, honoring business innovators. It was signed by the Carter & Wells communications team. She turned the screen toward Daniel. Do you think Elaine invited me? He frowned. Maybe, but don't go alone. Grace smiled faintly. I won't. I have you. But as the golden invitation reflected in her eyes, neither of them realized this gala wasn't a celebration. It was the trap that would pull every hidden secret into the light. The ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton shimmered under 1,000 crystal lights. Champagne glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and New York's elite floated between velvet curtains and laughter. The scent of Dior perfume hung in the air, mixing with money and vanity. Grace stepped through the grand doors, her heart steady but her palms damp. She wore a navy gown borrowed from a boutique Elaine had quietly arranged. Simple, elegant, powerful. Her hair was pulled back, her face calm, but her eyes told another story, determination born from heartbreak. Daniel walked beside her, dressed sharply in a black tuxedo, the picture of quiet confidence. Remember, he said, voice low, we're here to observe, not react. If anything feels off, we leave. Grace nodded. Got it. They entered the ballroom. The chandeliers reflected in mirrored walls, making everything glow like a dream she no longer believed in. Across the room, laughter erupted, the kind that once filled her old apartment. She turned and froze. Ethan stood near the stage, his arm draped around Ava Brooks. Cameras flashed around them like fireworks. Ava's white satin gown hugged her body, her smile picture perfect. Ethan spotted Grace immediately. His smile faltered. For a second, the noise around them disappeared. Grace met his gaze not with pain, but with quiet defiance. Then she turned away, ignoring him completely. Daniel handed her a glass of sparkling water. He saw you. Good, she said. Let him. Nearby, Victor Lang was speaking with reporters. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man untouchable. But when his eyes fell on Grace, the color drained from his face for just a heartbeat. He recovered quickly, raising his glass in a mock toast, before turning back to the crowd. Daniel leaned in. That's him, Victor Lang. Grace nodded slowly. The man who's been pulling the strings. Before Daniel could reply, a photographer approached. Mrs. Cole, can I get a picture? You look stunning tonight. Grace froze. Mrs. Cole. The title stung. Daniel stepped forward smoothly. No photos, thank you. They moved toward the side lounge, away from the cameras. That was staged, Daniel muttered. They want you photographed, to paint a narrative, the heartbroken ex, crashing her husband's new world. Grace's jaw tightened. Then let's give them something they don't expect. A hush fell over the ballroom as the host took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor leaders who inspire innovation and vision, including Carter & Wells, CFO, Mr. Victor Lang. Applause erupted. Victor walked up, basking in the spotlight. Grace watched him closely. She saw Ethan standing near the stage, taking mental notes, his expression somewhere between admiration and fear. Daniel whispered. Our tech team just texted. They've intercepted a data transfer from Victor's assistant to an external drive. It's happening right now, here. Grace's pulse raced. So, he brought evidence to the gala? Daniel nodded. He's arrogant enough to think no one will notice. As Victor finished his speech, Grace noticed movement near the bar, Ethan receiving something from a man in a dark suit. A small USB drive. She caught the glint of it as it slipped into his pocket. That's it, Daniel whispered. The file that ties Ethan to Victor's scheme. Grace swallowed hard. If we can get that, we can prove everything. But before they could act, Ava appeared in front of them, smiling with icy sweetness. Grace, what a surprise. Grace kept her expression neutral. Ava, I heard you've been keeping busy, Ava said, eyes darting to Daniel. How noble of you to bring a date. Hope it doesn't confuse the tabloids. Daniel smiled politely. We're not here for the tabloids. Ava tilted her head. Oh, right. You're here to relive old dreams. Must be hard, watching Ethan finally live the life you couldn't handle. Grace didn't flinch. She leaned in slightly. Funny. You think it's his life when he's just a prop in someone else's story. Ava's smile faltered. Excuse me? Grace's voice dropped. Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. Then she turned away, leaving Ava speechless. Across the room, Victor handed Ethan a nod, the signal. They moved toward a private lounge upstairs. Daniel followed at a distance, whispering, This is it. The transfer's happening now. Grace exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. She straightened her posture, her gown shimmering as she walked toward the elevator. Grace, Daniel said quietly. Are you sure about this? She looked him in the eye. I'm done being the victim. And as the elevator doors closed behind them, Grace didn't realize that within the next hour, she would hold the evidence that could destroy Victor Lang and reclaim everything Ethan stole. The elevator doors slid open to the private mezzanine of the Ritz-Carlton. The hum of music below faded, replaced by the low murmur of business talk and the clinking of expensive glassware. Grace and Daniel stepped into the softly lit lounge, where city lights stretched endlessly through floor-to-ceiling windows. The air smelled of bourbon and quiet power. Across the room, Ethan and Victor stood near a mahogany table, speaking in low tones. Ethan's posture was tense, like a man in too deep. Victor, in contrast, looked relaxed, predatory. His cufflinks gleamed like tiny blades as he handed Ethan a small black USB drive. That's it, Daniel whispered. Proof of their transfer. Grace's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She moved closer, pretending to study the skyline, while Daniel subtly recorded with his phone. She could hear fragments of their conversation. Once this is done, Carter and Wells is ours, Victor said. Elaine's too old to fight, and with the right story in the media, Grace will disappear. Ethan hesitated. You don't know her like I do. She doesn't quit, Victor smirked. Then we'll make her quit. Grace's breath caught. Her fingers curled into fists. Daniel touched her arm lightly. Not yet, he whispered, but fate never waits for timing. A waiter brushed past her, knocking her purse to the floor. As she knelt to pick it up, Victor looked over. Their eyes met recognition, then suspicion. Well, Victor said smoothly, look who decided to join us. Ethan turned, color draining from his face. Grace, she straightened slowly, forcing calm into her voice. Don't stop on my account. Victor smiled like a shark. You really should learn when to walk away, Mrs. Cole. Or is it Miss Miller now? Daniel stepped forward, his tone measured. Mr. Lang, as legal counsel, I'd advise you to watch your words. Victor laughed. You lawyers are all the same, thinking truth matters more than money. He turned back to Ethan. Handle your mess. Ethan looked torn, guilt flickering in his eyes. Grace, you shouldn't be here. Grace met his gaze. Neither should you. Daniel leaned in, his voice sharp now. We have enough evidence to expose both of you. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, everything. Victor's smirk faltered for the first time. You're bluffing. Daniel lifted his phone. Try me. The tension snapped. Ethan took a step forward, voice rising. You think you can destroy me with some files? I built this life. Grace interrupted softly. You built it on lies. Victor moved suddenly, grabbing for the USB drive. Daniel reacted faster, blocking his arm. The drive slipped from Victor's hand and skidded across the floor, stopping at Grace's feet. For a moment, everything froze, the music from downstairs swelling faintly like the soundtrack of destiny. Grace bent down, picked it up, and looked Victor dead in the eyes. "You're finished." Security guards appeared at the doorway, summoned by the commotion. Elaine Carter herself stepped through behind them, her presence commanding the room to silence. "No, Mr. Lang," she said coldly. "You are finished." Victor froze. "Elaine." "I've been watching," she said. "You underestimated me and my family." Grace turned toward her, eyes wide. "Family?" Elaine smiled gently. "The DNA test came back this afternoon. You're my granddaughter." Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan's face drained of all color. "What?" Elaine's voice hardened. "You married into the Carter bloodline and tried to destroy it. That's your legacy now." She turned to the guards. "Escort Mr. Lang and Mr. Cole out. The authorities will take it from here." Ethan tried to reach Grace. "Please, Grace, I was wrong. I didn't know." She stepped back, clutching the USB drive like a sword. "You knew enough to hurt me. That's all I'll remember." The guards led them away, their protests echoing down the corridor. Grace turned to Elaine, tears blurring her vision. "You knew before tonight, didn't you?" Elaine nodded softly. "I wanted to see what kind of woman you were. Now I know you're exactly like Evelyn, strong, even when broken." Daniel slipped a comforting hand onto Grace's shoulder. "We should get this to the authorities." Elaine smiled. "Already arranged, but the world deserves to hear it from her." Grace exhaled shakily, looking down at the small black drive in her hand. It wasn't just evidence, it was her rebirth. And as the lights of Manhattan glittered beyond the windows, Grace realized this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of her power. The morning after the gala, Manhattan glowed beneath a pale winter sun, its beauty a cruel contrast to the chaos the night before. News outlets buzzed with rumors: Carter and Wells scandal, CEO betrayal, heiress revealed. Grace's name hadn't surfaced yet, but the story was spreading like wildfire. She sat by the window in Elaine's Park Avenue penthouse, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, holding a mug of tea she hadn't touched. The city below looked peaceful, unaware that her world had shifted overnight. Daniel walked in, his tie loosened, his face exhausted from endless phone calls. "The authorities seized Victor Lang's accounts," he said. "They're freezing assets connected to the shell companies." "You did it." Grace. She nodded faintly, staring at the skyline. "I didn't do it alone." He smiled. "No, but you stood up when no one else could." Before he could say more, Elaine entered the room. Her poise was unwavering, every step measured, her cream silk blouse immaculate. "The board will convene in 2 days," she said. "You'll attend with me. It's time they meet the woman who saved the company." Grace swallowed hard. "Saved it?" "I feel like I just survived it." Elaine gave a small smile. "That's often the same thing." Then came a knock at the door. Daniel frowned, checking the security monitor. "It's him." Grace froze. "Ethan?" Before she could protest, Daniel opened the door. Ethan stood there unshaven, eyes red, wearing the same suit from the night before. "Please," he said quietly, "I just need 5 minutes." Elaine's voice turned cold. "You've done enough damage." But Grace raised a hand. "It's okay. I'll talk to him." Daniel hesitated, then stepped back, though his gaze never left Ethan. Ethan entered slowly, his arrogance stripped away. "Grace." "I'm sorry." She stayed silent, her expression unreadable. "I didn't know about your family," he continued. "Victor told me helping him was just business. He said Elaine was selling the company anyway. I thought," Grace cut in, "you thought if you played along, you'd come out rich and powerful." He winced. "Yes. And I hate myself for it." For a moment, she saw the man she once loved, lost, desperate, human. But then she remembered the night he left her in the snow, pregnant and alone. The memory hardened her heart. "Ethan," she said softly, "I don't hate you anymore." He looked up, surprised. "You don't?" No, she said, tears glimmering in her eyes. Because hate still means I care. You don't get that part of me anymore. Ethan's voice cracked. I made a mistake. I was scared. I didn't think I could be the man you needed. You were right, she replied. You couldn't. Silence filled the room, heavy and final. Ethan lowered his head, his voice trembling. I don't expect forgiveness. I wanted to see our baby when she's born. Grace's hand instinctively touched her belly. If you want to be in her life, it won't be through me. You'll talk to my lawyer. Daniel stepped forward slightly. That would be me. Ethan nodded weakly. I deserve that. Elaine's voice softened, but stayed firm. You may leave now, Mr. Cole. The law will handle the rest. Ethan turned to Grace one last time. You were always too good for me. I just realized it too late. He left quietly, the sound of the door closing like the end of a long, painful chapter. Grace stood still for a moment, then exhaled. Daniel came closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You handled that perfectly. She gave a small, tired smile. No screaming, no tears, just truth. Elaine looked at her proudly. You've inherited more than a name, Grace. You've inherited strength. The room fell silent, the weight of closure settling gently around them. Outside, the city shimmered beneath the afternoon light. Somewhere below, people hurried to meetings, coffee in hand, unaware that a woman who'd once been broken now stood tall above them, not as a victim, not as a wife abandoned, but as the heir to her own story. And as Grace looked out the window, she knew the sweetest revenge wasn't destroying Ethan's world, it was building her own. 2 days later, snow returned to Manhattan. The city looked like a movie set: white streets, golden lights, and quiet before a storm. Inside the glass-walled boardroom of Carter & Wells, tension crackled like static. Grace stood beside Elaine Carter at the long mahogany table, her hands steady, though her heart raced. Across from them sat the company's remaining executives, men and women in designer suits, who whispered behind manicured hands. At the far end, Daniel arranged folders and digital files on a sleek MacBook Pro. He nodded at Grace, silently telling her she could do this. Elaine began the meeting. Before we begin, she said, voice calm but cutting, there's one truth you all deserve to know. This company was built not just on strategy and numbers, but on loyalty, something our former CFO forgot. The room went still. Mr. Victor Lang, she continued, will face federal investigation for fraud, insider trading, and financial manipulation. And thanks to new evidence, she glanced at Grace, we know he didn't act alone. Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Grace opened the silver USB drive and handed it to Daniel, who connected it to the projector. The screen filled with folders labeled offshore accounts, Lang and Cole transfers, press manipulation plan. A middle-aged executive leaned forward. Where did you get this? Daniel replied smoothly. Recovered from Victor Lang's personal possession during the charity gala, legally obtained. All transactions were traced back to shell companies linked to Ethan Cole. Whispers turned into shock. Grace stood silently, letting the truth echo. Elaine looked directly at her. Grace, tell them what he did to you. For a moment, she hesitated. Her throat tightened, but she took a breath and began. Ethan Cole was my husband. When I became pregnant, he decided I didn't fit his new life. He left me on Christmas Eve not just as a woman, but as his stepping stone. What I didn't know was that he was using me to reach this company. A few executives exchanged guilty glances. The room that once judged her as an outsider now saw her as the victim of their own colleagues' greed. Grace continued, her voice stronger. He used my connection to Elaine, my grandmother, to try to infiltrate Carter & Wells through Victor Lang. When that failed, he chose to destroy me publicly, but he didn't count on me surviving. She turned toward the projection, pointing to the final document, an email labeled Media Draft. The text revealed plans to leak false stories about her mental state, claiming she was unfit and emotionally unstable. Gasps filled the room again. Elaine's expression hardened. They underestimated her intelligence and her dignity. Daniel switched to the final slide. a forensic summary of every illegal transfer Victor and Ethan made. "With this," he said, "we can recover stolen funds, clear the company's name, and secure Miss Miller's rightful position as a stakeholder under the Carter Family Trust." The board fell silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector. Finally, one director spoke. "Miss Miller, if what you're saying is true, you saved us all." Grace gave a small nod. "I just wanted the truth. Nothing more." Elaine smiled proudly. "The truth is enough." She turned to the board. "I move that Grace Miller be recognized as a Carter family member and offered a seat on our ethics committee." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then genuine. Grace blinked back tears. Daniel's hand brushed lightly against hers under the table. A silent "you did it." When the meeting adjourned, Elaine hugged her gently. "Your grandmother would be proud. You didn't fight to destroy, you fought to restore." As they left the boardroom, Daniel stopped by the window overlooking Park Avenue. Grace looked at the skyline, the same one she'd once watched through tears, homeless and heartbroken. "I don't want to walk away," she said. "I want to build something new." Daniel smiled. "Then let's start with dinner. No lawyers, no drama, just two people breathing again." She laughed softly, feeling warmth she hadn't known in months. And as they stepped out into the snow, the world that once broke her now shimmered beneath her feet, because for the first time, Grace Miller wasn't surviving anymore. She was leading. The morning sky over Manhattan was gray, heavy with snow clouds. Inside the top floor of Carter & Wells headquarters, the atmosphere felt even colder. The boardroom, with its glass walls, polished oak table, and panoramic view of Park Avenue, was ready for a meeting that would determine the company's future. Elaine Carter sat at the head of the table, poised and commanding. To her right sat Grace, wearing a tailored black blazer and a calm expression that masked her racing heart. Daniel stood nearby, reviewing notes on his tablet. Across from them, the remaining executives whispered nervously. Every eye in the room was on the empty seat reserved for Victor Lang. At precisely 9 a.m., the door opened. Victor entered, escorted by two legal officers. His once slick confidence was gone, replaced with a hollow arrogance. "Elaine," he said flatly, "this is unnecessary. I've built half this company." Elaine's tone was icy. "You tried to steal all of it." Victor smirked, though sweat glistened at his temple. "You think the board will believe your little heiress story? A girl who appeared out of nowhere?" Grace leaned forward slightly. "Out of nowhere. My name's been in your files for months. You just never cared to look past your greed." The room went silent. Victor's jaw twitched. Elaine nodded to Daniel. "Begin." Daniel tapped the screen, and the projector came alive. Images appeared, balance sheets, encrypted emails, transaction trails. He spoke clearly, his voice filling the room with authority. Mr. Lang diverted company funds into offshore accounts under shell entities he created. He used his position to manipulate financial reports, defraud shareholders, and Victor cut him off. "You have no proof those were my accounts." Daniel didn't flinch. "We traced the IP addresses to your home network, your personal devices, and your executive assistant's laptop. There's also a recorded conversation between you and Ethan Cole discussing the transfer strategy." "Should I play it?" Victor's face drained of color. Elaine's voice was calm but lethal. "We all make mistakes, Victor. Yours was thinking no one could ever stand up to you." Grace met his gaze. "You ruined lives for money. You nearly destroyed mine. You underestimated how far truth can travel even when you bury it under lies." For a moment, Victor looked at her with something almost like pity. "You really think this company is better off with you in it? You don't know how ruthless this world is, Grace. You're still playing with emotions. Business doesn't care about feelings." Grace smiled faintly, steady. "That's where you're wrong. Real leadership is built on people, not power. And that's something you'll never understand." Elaine turned to the board. "All in favor of removing Victor Lang from his position and handing the evidence to the authorities." Hands rose around the table, one after another, unanimous. Victor exhaled slowly, his arrogance slipping. "You think you've won, Elaine? This company will eat her alive." He looked at Grace. "You'll learn the hard way nice people don't last here." Grace stood. Then I'll be the first. Security stepped forward. Victor didn't resist this time. He glanced back once, muttering, "You're just like your grandmother, stubborn to the end." Elaine's lips curved, and proud of it. The doors closed behind him, leaving only silence, the kind that comes when justice finally lands. Elaine looked at Grace, pride shining in her eyes. "You've done more for this company in 1 month than most do in a lifetime." Grace smiled softly. "I just wanted peace, not power." "Sometimes they come together," Elaine replied. Daniel placed his hand gently on Grace's shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded, exhaling for the first time that morning. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, drifting past the glass walls. Grace watched them, the city glowing beneath her. The same city where she once stood alone and forgotten, now reflecting her strength back at her. Elaine broke the silence. "Grace, welcome to the board." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "Let's rebuild it honestly this time." And as the snow covered Park Avenue in white, the woman once abandoned in the cold now sat at the table of power, not as a survivor, but as the one writing the new rules. 3 days after the boardroom showdown, the city moved on, but Grace's name was starting to whisper through Manhattan's corporate circles. The pregnant heiress who brought down a CFO, the woman who stood up to power. The headlines hadn't gone public yet, but word of mouth traveled fast in a city built on secrets. Elaine had arranged for Grace to stay in a private suite at the Park Hyatt while her new apartment was being prepared. The suite overlooked Central Park, quiet, serene, wrapped in snow. But peace, for Grace, never lasted long. It started that evening. Daniel was still at the office when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A man's voice, low, distorted, came through the line. "You should have stayed quiet." Her stomach dropped. "Who is this?" No reply, just breathing. Then, "You took everything from the wrong people." The line went dead. Grace's hands shook. She immediately called Daniel. "Someone just threatened me again." "I'm on my way," he said without hesitation. 15 minutes later, he burst into the suite, his expression carved in steel. "Show me the call log." He scanned her phone. "It's encrypted. Could be one of Victor's connections still trying to intimidate you." Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "He's already in custody. Why won't it stop?" "Because power doesn't die with one man," Daniel said grimly. "His allies are still out there." Before he could say more, the hotel lights flickered once, twice, then went dark. The entire suite plunged into blackness. Grace gasped. "Daniel?" He grabbed his phone, using the flashlight. "It's probably just an outage," but the tone in his voice said he didn't believe it. Then came a noise, a soft thud from the balcony. Daniel moved fast, pulling Grace behind him. He opened the drawer of the desk, found the metal flashlight, and gripped it like a weapon. Slowly, he approached the balcony doors. Through the glass, a shadow moved. "Stay here," he whispered. "Daniel, no." Before she could stop him, he yanked open the door. Cold wind rushed in, carrying snow and the faint hum of city traffic below. The balcony was empty, but a red laser dot glowed faintly on the opposite building, aimed straight at the window. Daniel cursed and pulled Grace down behind the couch. "They're watching us." Grace's breath came in sharp bursts. "Oh my God." He grabbed his phone, calling security. "This is Daniel Hayes' suite, 47B. We've got a breach. Send hotel security and police now." Within minutes, the power flicked back on. 2 uniformed guards arrived, followed by hotel management. They swept the balcony, finding only a small drone crashed against the railing, the source of the red light. A camera lens blinked weakly before dying. "It's a surveillance drone," the guard said. "Not a weapon. Someone wanted footage." Grace closed her eyes, trembling. "They're trying to scare me again." Daniel sat beside her, taking her hand. "They're failing." Elaine arrived half an hour later, her face pale with fury. "This has gone far enough," she said sharply. "I'm moving you into my townhouse. No more hotels." Grace shook her head. "I don't want to hide forever. If I give them that power, I lose again." Elaine studied her, pride and fear warring in her eyes. "You're your grandmother's granddaughter," she murmured. She never ran from a storm either. Later that night, after everyone left, Grace sat on the couch, staring out at the glittering skyline. The fear was still there, crawling under her skin, but so was something else. Resolve. Daniel sat beside her quietly. "We'll increase your security, track that number, and find who's behind it. You're not alone in this." Grace looked at him, her voice steady now. "I know. And when we find them, I won't be scared anymore. I'll make them face me." Daniel nodded. "Then we'll face them together." Outside, snow kept falling over Manhattan, silent, relentless as somewhere in the dark. Another message was being typed. "If she doesn't stop, she won't live to tell her story." The next morning, the air outside Park Avenue was bitterly cold, but Grace woke up before sunrise, her thoughts hotter than fire. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the drone's faint whir, saw the red laser dot dancing across the glass. Fear still sat inside her, but now it had shape, a direction. She wouldn't let them win. Daniel arrived early, carrying coffee from Starbucks and his ever-present MacBook Pro. Grace shook her head. "I kept thinking, whoever's behind this, it's not just revenge, it's control. They want me scared enough to stop pushing forward." Daniel sat across from her. "You're right. We found something last night. The call came from an untraceable satellite line, but the SIM card was purchased through a holding company registered under Victor Lang's partner, Harold Mercer." She frowned. "Who's that?" Daniel turned the screen toward her, showing an article. Mercer was Victor's silent investor, owns several media firms, the kind that bury or twist stories for money. Grace's stomach tightened. "So he's cleaning up Victor's mess." "Or trying to," Daniel said. "If he can discredit you before the press connects you to the Carter family, he can claim the company's collapse was your fault." Grace looked out the window, watching the city wake up. Yellow cabs, steam rising from manholes. Ordinary life moving forward while she lived inside a chess game. "I'm done being his pawn," she said quietly. Daniel raised a brow. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we fight fire with truth. If he wants to use the media, we use it better. But we don't play their dirty way, we go clean, real. We tell everything. My story, Elaine's forgiveness, the evidence, all of it." Daniel hesitated. "That's risky. Once your name hits the press, you can't undo it." Grace smiled faintly. "Let them see me." The woman Ethan threw away, the woman Victor tried to silence. Let them see what they couldn't destroy. Elaine entered the suite just in time to hear that last line. "I agree," she said, her voice proud. "It's time." Grace blinked. "You're okay with going public?" Elaine nodded. "This family has survived scandal before. We'll survive truth. And perhaps it's time Carter and Wells had a real heart again." For the first time in days, Grace laughed softly. "You sound like Grandma." Elaine's eyes softened. "She'd be proud of you. She'd say the fire inside you came from her." By afternoon, Daniel had arranged an exclusive interview with the Manhattan Chronicle, the same outlet that once glorified Ethan and Ava's wedding. Poetic justice. The shoot took place in Elaine's library, warm with oak shelves and a crackling fireplace. Grace wore a simple cream blouse and minimal makeup. No luxury, no pretense, just authenticity. The reporter, a young woman with kind eyes, asked gently, "Grace, why speak out now?" Grace took a breath. "Because silence feeds corruption. I kept quiet for too long. I thought dignity meant hiding pain, but dignity is standing in it and still holding your head high." She talked about Ethan, about betrayal, about rebuilding her life from nothing. She described Victor's schemes and Elaine's forgiveness. Every word came out steady, strong, real. When the interview ended, the reporter reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You just gave every woman watching a reason to believe she can start over." Grace smiled, tears glimmering. "That's all I wanted." Later, as Daniel drove her back to the Park Hyatt, her phone buzzed again, a new email. The subject line read, "You shouldn't have done that." Daniel saw her face change. "What is it?" She handed him the phone. The message contained only one line: "Truth burns, Grace. Let's see how bright you shine when it's your turn to burn." Daniel's knuckles tightened on the wheel. He's escalating. Grace stared out the window, the city lights flickering against her reflection. "Then let him come," she whispered. "I'm not running anymore." And somewhere in a high-rise office overlooking the Hudson, Harold Mercer poured himself a drink and smiled. The game had just begun again, but this time, his opponent was no longer afraid. Woo! The morning after Grace's interview aired, Manhattan didn't just wake up, it erupted. Every major outlet, from the New York Times to Business Insider, had her face on the front page. The headline was impossible to ignore. "Pregnant Heiress exposes corporate corruption. Grace Miller breaks her silence." In cafes, offices, and subways, people were talking. Some admired her courage, others doubted her motives. But one thing was clear: the name Grace Miller had become impossible to bury. At Elaine's townhouse, phones rang nonstop. PR advisors, lawyers, and journalists all wanted a comment. Grace sat at the kitchen island, sipping lukewarm tea while Daniel scrolled through social media on his iPad. "Listen to this," he said, half amused, half worried. "Number justice for Grace is trending nationwide." She gave a small, tired smile. "I never thought I'd see my name next to a hashtag." "You're not just a headline anymore," Daniel said. "You're a symbol." Elaine entered the room, elegant as always, holding her morning espresso. "Symbols inspire change, but they also attract enemies," she said. "We need to stay ahead of the storm." Grace frowned. "You think Mercer will retaliate?" Elaine nodded. "Men like him don't lose quietly. He controls media networks, investors, and people who still owe him favors. He'll strike back not with bullets, but with stories." Daniel looked up. "Then we fight with the truth again. Transparency. Every record, every document, we release it before he can twist it." Grace exhaled slowly. "I'm ready." But before they could move, the television behind them flashed with breaking news. Ethan Cole's face filled the screen, pale, disheveled, sitting across from a morning show anchor. The caption read, "Exclusive. Ethan Cole tells his side." Elaine muted the room. "Oh no." The reporter leaned forward. "Ethan, are you saying your ex-wife fabricated her story?" Ethan looked straight into the camera, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Grace is complicated. She's emotional, and she's going through a difficult pregnancy. I loved her, but she's not well. Her lawyers are manipulating her to destroy my reputation and Carter and Wells." Grace's jaw tightened. Daniel muttered a curse. The anchor asked, "So, you deny any involvement with Victor Lang or Harold Mercer?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "Absolutely. I was never part of their operations. I'm just trying to move on with my life." The screen cut to an image of Grace, looking distraught from an old photo, one clearly taken during her worst days. The network's logo glowed beneath it. Grace turned away, her stomach twisting. "He's turning it around, making me look unstable." Daniel stood, pacing. "Classic Mercer strategy. They're using empathy against you, the wounded husband narrative. We need to counter this fast." Elaine's voice was firm. "Then we go public with the full recordings. The conversation between Ethan and Victor at the Ritz-Carlton, the transfer logs, everything." Daniel nodded. "I'll get the files prepped." Grace rubbed her temples, feeling her baby move inside her. "I can handle hate, but I won't let them destroy the truth." Hours later, Daniel uploaded the full video evidence, unedited, time-stamped, authenticated to a verified press channel. Within minutes, the footage of Victor handing Ethan the USB went viral. Comment sections exploded. "He lied on live TV. She had proof all along. Ethan and Mercer are done." By evening, Grace's inbox overflowed with messages, strangers thanking her, women sharing their own stories of betrayal and resilience. One message stood out. "Your courage made me leave someone who was breaking me. Thank you." Grace stared at the words, tears blurring her vision. "Daniel, I think this was never about revenge. It was about giving others permission to fight back. Daniel smiled softly. You didn't just survive, Grace. You started a movement. But outside, the city's calm was deceptive. Across the Hudson, Harold Mercer watched the footage on a massive screen in his penthouse, anger simmering beneath his smile. He poured himself another drink and whispered, "You want war, Miss Miller? Then war it is." And as snow began to fall over Manhattan once more, Grace had no idea that the man watching her from the shadows had just decided to burn everything, even if it meant going down with her. The snowstorm hit Manhattan the same morning Grace's court hearing was scheduled. The wind howled through the concrete canyons of Park Avenue as black cars pulled up outside the federal courthouse. Cameras flashed like lightning as Grace stepped out, escorted by Daniel and 2 security officers. Reporters shouted her name. "Grace, do you have a statement? Are you afraid of Harold Mercer's counterclaim? Is it true Ethan will testify against you?" Grace kept her chin high, her dark wool coat wrapped tightly around her, her gloved hand resting on her belly. "No comment," Daniel said calmly as he guided her through the chaos. Inside, the air was thick with tension marble floors, echoing footsteps, and the smell of old paper and justice. The case was supposed to be simple: Victor Lang's fraud, Ethan Cole's complicity, and Mercer's obstruction. But Mercer had twisted it into something else, a media circus. He'd filed a counterclaim accusing Grace of defamation, claiming her interview had irreparably damaged his business reputation. Elaine sat in the gallery, her expression composed but fierce. "Remember, Grace," she whispered before the session began, "truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand." When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. Mercer's legal team filled one side of the bench, 5 attorneys in expensive suits, led by a silver-haired man with a voice like silk and poison. On the other side sat Daniel, calm but alert, with Grace by his side. "Your Honor," the opposing lawyer began, "my client, Mr. Mercer, is a respected businessman whose career has been slandered by false claims. Miss Miller's interview was not a pursuit of justice, it was a calculated attack for personal gain." Grace stared straight ahead, her pulse steady. Daniel rose. "Respectfully, Your Honor, what Miss Miller shared was truth, backed by documented evidence. Evidence we've already submitted: recordings, financial statements, and sworn testimonies." The lawyer smirked. "Ah, yes, the famous USB drive, the one conveniently appearing in her possession the same night she accidentally attended a high-profile gala." Daniel's eyes flashed. "You mean the gala where your client was laundering millions through shell accounts? That one?" A few gasps echoed in the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Counselors, stay focused." The morning dragged on. Mercer's lawyers painted Grace as manipulative, a scorned wife seeking fame. They played clips from her interview, twisting her words. Each accusation felt like a blade, but she didn't flinch. Daniel fought back with facts, his voice unwavering. By noon, the judge called for a recess. Grace stepped outside the courtroom into the hallway, her nerves finally catching up to her. Daniel handed her a bottle of water. "You're doing great. They're cracking." Mercer's sweating. She smiled faintly. "He doesn't look like a man who sweats," Daniel chuckled. "Even snakes sweat when cornered." Just then, a commotion erupted near the courtroom entrance. A reporter burst in, breathless. "Breaking news. Federal agents just raided Mercer's office. They found encrypted files linking him directly to Lang's offshore accounts." Grace blinked. "You're serious?" The reporter nodded. "The story's everywhere. The Department of Justice is confirming it." Within minutes, the news spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed across the courthouse. Mercer's lawyers scrambled, whispering urgently. When the session resumed, the judge looked unimpressed. "It appears," he said dryly, "the court has received new information." Daniel stood. "Your Honor, we request that Mr. Mercer's counterclaim be dismissed immediately based on this evidence." Mercer's lead attorney protested weakly, but the judge cut him off. "Denied. The evidence speaks for itself. This court hereby dismisses the counterclaim and grants protective status to Miss Miller." Grace exhaled, tears welling in her eyes. Elaine reached for her hand from the gallery. Daniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. As the gavel struck, Mercer stood abruptly. "You think this ends here?" he hissed. "You think truth wins in the real world? You'll see how far power really reaches." Grace rose slowly, meeting his glare with steady calm. "Maybe. But today." Power blinked first. Reporters flooded the hallway as she exited, their cameras flashing like fireworks. For the first time, she didn't hide from the light, she walked straight into it. That night, every news channel replayed the moment she left the courthouse, her hand resting protectively on her belly, Daniel at her side. The caption read, "Grace Miller wins the woman who stood against power." And as snow fell softly over the courthouse steps, Grace realized the battle wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman told to stay silent. And silence, from now on, was something she'd never allow again. Night fell heavy over Manhattan, wrapping the skyline in quiet gold and shadow. Grace sat by the window of Elaine's townhouse, the city glowing beneath her like a heartbeat she finally understood. The courthouse victory had shaken the city, but peace still felt distant. There were too many ghosts left, and one of them was Ethan. Daniel had spent the day handling the final paperwork. Victor Lang was awaiting trial. Harold Mercer was under federal investigation, and the Carter and Wells name was rising again, this time built on truth instead of deception. But despite all of that, Grace's thoughts drifted back to the man who had started it all, the one who broke her and somehow still haunted her. A knock came at the door. Elaine called from downstairs. "Grace, you have a visitor." She hesitated. "Who is it?" Elaine's voice softened. "Ethan Cole." The air seemed to freeze. Grace's chest tightened. Part of her wanted to slam the door before he could even speak. Another part wanted to look him in the eye one last time. Daniel appeared beside her. "You don't owe him anything," he said quietly. Grace nodded. "I know, but I need closure." She walked slowly downstairs. Ethan stood in the foyer, thinner, older, his once perfect posture slouched beneath a cheap coat. The charm that once filled every room had vanished. Guilt had taken its place. He spoke first. "You look stronger." She folded her arms. "I am." He looked down, then up again. "I watched the trial. You destroyed Mercer. You really did it." "I didn't destroy anyone," she said calmly. "They destroyed themselves. I just stopped letting them destroy me." He tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "Grace, I didn't come here to argue. I came to apologize really this time. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I couldn't keep living without saying it." Grace said nothing. Ethan stepped closer, his voice shaking. "I thought success would fix the emptiness inside me. I chased it through women, through money, through lies. But when I saw you walk out of that courthouse, I realized I traded my soul for nothing." Her throat tightened. For years, she'd dreamed of hearing those words, but now they just sounded hollow. "You didn't just lose me, Ethan," she said softly. "You lost yourself." He nodded slowly. "I know. And I deserve it. But I still wanted to see you, just once, before." "Before what?" she asked. He hesitated. "Before I turn myself in. Mercer's files mention me too. I'll be indicted next week. I can't run anymore." Grace blinked, stunned. "You're actually confessing?" He gave a weary smile. "Maybe seeing you fight made me remember who I was before all of this. Maybe I just want to meet my daughter once, even if it's from a distance." Tears welled in her eyes, uninvited. "You're not the man I married, Ethan. But maybe, just maybe, this version of you can do one thing right." He nodded, voice breaking. "I'll take responsibility. For everything. And thank you, Grace, for surviving what I did to you." She wiped her tears quickly. "Goodbye, Ethan." He lingered for a second, then turned toward the door. Before leaving, he glanced back. "Daniel's a good man. Don't waste the chance to be happy again." When the door closed, the silence that followed felt clean like the end of a long storm. Elaine walked in from the hallway. "Are you all right?" Grace smiled faintly. For the first time, yes. Daniel appeared moments later, reading her face. "He's gone?" She nodded. Gone for good. He stepped closer, his tone gentle. Then maybe it's time you start living again, not as the woman he left, but as the woman you became. Grace looked at him, really looked, the steady eyes, the quiet strength. Maybe you're right. Outside, the snow began again, not harsh this time, but soft and slow, blanketing the city in forgiveness. And somewhere in a police precinct across town, Ethan Cole signed his confession, while Grace Miller finally let her heart breathe free. A week later, Manhattan glittered beneath the morning Sunday. The storm had passed, and the city moved with its usual rhythm, yellow cabs honking, steam rising from manholes, the pulse of ambition beating through every skyscraper. But inside the top floor of Carter and Wells, something new was taking shape. Grace stood before the boardroom window, the skyline reflected in the glass behind her. The same room where she once trembled in fear now felt like home. The plaque outside the door read Ethics Committee Chair, Grace Miller. Elaine entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. You still look surprised every time you see that sign. Grace smiled. Maybe because a few months ago, I was just trying to survive. Now I'm running a department that demands honesty from the same world that tried to destroy me. Elaine handed her a cup. That's exactly why you belong here. Daniel joined them, his suit perfectly pressed, his usual calm energy filling the room. The press is waiting downstairs. They want your statement before the rebranding conference. Grace nodded. I'll be ready. Elaine adjusted a folder on the table. Remember, this isn't about headlines anymore. It's about legacy. This company nearly died from greed. You're the one proving it can be built on integrity again. Grace exhaled deeply, her hand brushing the faint curve of her pregnant belly. I'm not just doing this for the company. I'm doing it for her, for the life I'm bringing into this world. I want her to grow up believing strength doesn't have to come from cruelty. Elaine's eyes softened. Your grandmother would have said the same thing. Daniel's phone buzzed. They're ready for us. The 3 of them rode the elevator to the lobby, where the rebranding event was set up. Reporters filled the room, cameras flashing against the elegant Carter and Wells banner redesigned in clean gold and white. When Grace stepped onto the stage, the noise dimmed. She stood at the podium, calm but radiant under the soft light. Good morning, she began. A few months ago, this company was known for secrecy and betrayal. Today, we rebuild it with truth. I once believed my voice didn't matter, that silence was survival, but silence almost killed everything I loved. So now, I speak. She paused, letting the words sink in. Carter and Wells will operate under a new principle. Every decision, every contract, every partnership must answer one question. Would you still be proud of this if your name was on it? Because mine will be. The room erupted in applause. Elaine smiled proudly. Daniel caught her eye, mouthing a single word. Brilliant. When the press conference ended, Grace slipped into a quiet hallway, needing a moment to breathe. She leaned against the cool marble wall, her heart steady but full. Daniel found her there. You did it, he said softly. She smiled. We did it. He handed her his Mont Blanc pen, the same one he'd used during her first legal filing. Keep it, he said. Every time you sign something, remember where you started. Grace laughed lightly. You know, you've been part lawyer, part guardian angel. He shrugged with a grin. I'll settle for friend. She hesitated, then said quietly, You've been more than that, Daniel. Their eyes met the kind of moment that didn't need words. The noise from the lobby faded, replaced by something warmer, quieter. Elaine appeared suddenly, smiling knowingly. Come, both of you. The photographers want one last shot, the woman who saved Carter and Wells. Grace chuckled. I didn't save it alone. Elaine winked. No, but you're the reason it deserved saving. As they walked back toward the cameras, Grace caught her reflection in the glass wall, no longer the abandoned wife, no longer the frightened woman standing outside the plaza in the snow. She saw a leader, a mother, a survivor who had turned pain into purpose. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle, glistening, like confetti from heaven. The photographers snapped one final image. Grace, standing between Daniel and Elaine, smiling softly at the future. And somewhere beyond the flash of cameras and applause, Grace whispered to herself not a vow, not a promise, but a truth finally earned. The storm didn't end me. It crowned me. Spring arrived quietly in Manhattan. The snow had melted into glittering puddles, and the trees in Central Park were dusted with the first hints of green. For the first time in what felt like forever, Grace Miller woke to peace, not silence from fear, but stillness from healing. The sun poured through the tall windows of her new apartment overlooking the park. The space was warm, filled with life, soft curtains, fresh flowers, a crib in the corner, and photographs of family, one of Elaine smiling, another of Grace standing beside Daniel at the Carter and Wells rebranding event. A faint cry came from the crib. Grace smiled instantly. She rose, wrapped in a cozy robe, and walked to the baby. "Good morning, my little miracle," she whispered. The infant blinked up at her, cheeks rosy and eyes impossibly blue. "You have your father's eyes," Grace said softly, "but not his mistakes." She lifted her daughter into her arms, rocking gently as morning light spilled across the room. Outside, a distant saxophone played from the street below, the sound carrying through the open window like a promise of hope. The doorbell rang. Grace turned, still cradling the baby. "Come in." Daniel stepped inside, holding a bouquet of white tulips and a warm smile. "You look like you actually slept last night." "Miracles do happen," Grace teased. He handed her the flowers. "For the newest member of Manhattan's strongest family." Grace laughed. "You're too kind." Daniel looked around the apartment, admiration in his eyes. "You built this, Grace, from ashes." She set the flowers on the counter. "No," she said gently. "I rebuilt myself." The rest followed. They sat together on the couch, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. For a while, they said nothing, just listened to the city outside, alive and bright. "You know," Daniel said finally, "Elaine's hosting that charity gala tonight. She wants you there front and center." Grace smiled faintly. "I told her I might skip it. I've had enough gala drama for one lifetime." Daniel chuckled. "Fair, but this one's different. It's to fund scholarships for single mothers starting new careers. It's your initiative, remember?" She blinked, touched. "She actually made it happen." He nodded. "She even named it after your grandmother, the Evelyn Foundation." Grace's eyes shimmered. "She'd love that." "Then you should come," he said softly. "Not as the victim everyone remembers, but as the woman they'll never forget." She looked down at her baby. "You think the world's ready to see me again?" Daniel smiled. "Grace, the world's been waiting." That evening, the gala unfolded at the River Cafe, the same place where Elaine and Grace's grandmother once took that photo decades ago. The air was filled with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the hum of a jazz band. Fairy lights glowed against the skyline, reflecting off the Brooklyn Bridge like constellations reborn. When Grace entered, wearing an elegant white dress that shimmered under the lights, the room fell into a hush. She wasn't the broken woman from the tabloids. She was rebirth, made flesh, calm, powerful, radiant. Elaine greeted her with tears in her eyes. "You look like her," she whispered. "Your grandmother." Grace smiled. Maybe that's her way of showing she's still here. Daniel joined them, offering Grace his arm. "Ready to make a speech, Miss Carter?" She laughed softly. "It's still Grace Miller." He leaned closer. "Then let's make sure the world never forgets that name." Grace stepped onto the stage as the music faded. She looked out at the sea of faces, reporters, investors, single mothers, and survivors like herself. "I once thought survival meant staying quiet," she began. "But real survival means building again, not out of revenge, but out of love. Tonight isn't about me. It's about every woman who's been told she's not enough, every mother who had to start over with nothing. This," she gestured around the room, "is for them." Applause thundered through the hall. Elaine dabbed her eyes. Daniel's gaze lingered on her with quiet pride. As Grace stepped down, he whispered, "You did it again." "No," she said, smiling at him, at her family, at the life she'd rebuilt. "We did." Outside, the night air was cool and soft. Grace looked up at the stars scattered above the Manhattan skyline. The city that once broke her now sparkled like a mirror, reflecting her strength. And as she whispered goodnight to the daughter sleeping in her arms, Grace Miller finally understood the end of one story is only the beginning of another. So, that's how the story ends, but maybe it's not really an ending, right? Hey, my wonderful friends. You're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed with Grace until this moment, maybe something in her journey touched your heart too. Maybe you've been there standing in the storm, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again. Grace's story reminds us of one timeless truth. We don't control what happens to us, but we always control how we rise afterward. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's exactly what Grace did. She turned her pain into purpose, her heartbreak into healing. So, if life has knocked you down, take a deep breath. Your story isn't over, it's just waiting for your next chapter. You're stronger than the moments that broke you. And healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to love yourself again. If this story spoke to you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs a reminder that they're not alone, and don't forget to subscribe. Because here, we tell stories that heal hearts one truth at a time.